Welcome back. And for persistence, we are going to directly compare the CMD variable and the string persist. So else if CMD is equal to persist, and if the condition is true, then we shall proceed to implement persistence on our target system. Now for that, I'm going to function right here called persist, and it shall return a string which shall notify us of whether or not the process has been successful. That string is what we shall later on send back to our server. Now, before we actually implement our persistence functionality, I would like us to understand the kinds of persistence that we can achieve on a system. So there is two kinds of persistence, one being system-wide and the other being user-level. Now, system-wide persistence basically means that our program will start regardless of the user that logs into the system. However, this requires root privileges in order for us to be able to implement it, while the other one, being limited to a specific user, does not necessarily require root privileges. Now for our case, we are going to work with user-level persistence, since it is not all the time that we will have root access to a system. So how are we going to implement it? We have a number of steps right here, and the first one will be to create a file. For example, a file named persist in the tmp directory, and once we have created the file, we shall proceed to write something to the file. As you can see, the string that we shall be writing to the file follows the format at reboot, followed by the path to the executable that we want to be started every time the system is rebooted. And of course, please do not forget a new line character at the end of the string that we write to the file, because if you omit it, you'll actually get back an error. Once we have written this string to our file, we shall proceed to execute the crontab command followed by the file. So user bin crontab, which is where the crontab executable is located on the system, followed by the name of our file. Now that we have understood that, we can proceed to implement it in our code. So the first thing I'm going to do is to create a variable called filename, which will hold the name of the file, where we shall have that instruction. I'm going to call it persist. And once we have done that, I will proceed to create the file. So I'll use the create function of the OS package and pass in the name of the file. And as you can see, it returns a the file and an error. So I'm going to store that in a variable. And once we have created the file, we can proceed to write the string to the file. However, as you can see right here, we need a path to our current executable, and therefore we are going to start by getting that and storing it in a variable. So I'm going to call it exec_path, and to actually get the path to our executable, we are going to use the executable function of the OS package, and as you can see right here, it returns the path name of the executable that started the current process, which in this case will be our malware. It returns a string and an error. So I'm going to store that in a variable called exec_path and ignore the error. And once we have that, we can now proceed to write this command to the file. So for that, we are going to use the fprintf function of the fmt package, which allows us to write formatted strings to a file. So the first argument will be file. The second one will be our string, so attribute, and the format specifier for a string, which will be substituted by exec_path. Now, once we have done that, the final thing that we are going to do is to execute this command, and for that we'll need to import something extra up here, which is os/exec, and this basically allows us to execute shell commands in our program. So once we have imported that, we can proceed to do exec.command, and as you can see, we have two parameters right here. One is the name or the command that we want to execute, followed by any number of arguments that we shall pass to our command. So our command will be user/bin/crontab, and the second value right here will be our file name. Now, to get the results, which is what will enable us to understand whether or not our process has been successful, we shall get the output right here, combined output rather. And as you can see, this function returns the command, runs the command and returns its combined standard output and standard error. So our focus will be the error, so that if the error is not nil, that we will know that our process was not successful, and if it is actually nil, then we shall know that our process was successful. So we are going to store this in variables. And then we shall proceed to check if our error variable is nil. So if error is not equal to nil, then we shall return back the error. So return, or rather, we can just return a string that persistence, or the error establishing persistence. And if the error is nil, then we can simply return that persistence has been established successfully. And as you can see right here, I almost forgot a new line character, so let me add that. And that is it. Once we have written down our function to achieve persistence, we can get back right here and send back our response to our server, the result of this function, so persist. So as you can see, the steps were to first create a file, then proceed to write to the file this instruction attribute followed by the path to our executable, and finally a new line character. And after we have done that, we proceed to execute the command crontab followed by the name of the file. And if it is successful, then we proceed to return a string that persistence has been established successfully. And if we get an error, then that means that we are not able to successfully establish persistence. That is it, guys, and in the next one, we shall now finish up by executing shell commands. I'll see you there.